Let's talk about the growth cycle of the vine. We begin with bud burst, which is in March and April in the Northern Hemisphere, September and October in the Southern Hemisphere. This happens in the spring where buds swell and burst open, and it marks the beginning of the growing season. Next we have shoot and leaf growth, which occurs between March and May in the Northern Hemisphere and September and November in the Southern Hemisphere. Out of the burst buds grow shoots rapidly and establish leaves. The shoots will normally be tied to the trellis for additional stability, and inflorescences will begin to grow. Flowering and fruit set. May through June in the Northern Hemisphere, November through December in the Southern Hemisphere. The inflorescences will begin to flower when the temperature becomes warm. Then the vine will self-pollinate, with each flower becoming a berry that has a hard green skin. Next is veraison and berry ripening. This occurs between July and September in the Northern Hemisphere, January through March in the Southern Hemisphere. It is marked by the changing of color of skins, where hard skins become soft and the green shade turns to red or a translucent or golden color depending on the variety. The grapes will swell with water, sugar levels rise, and acidity begins to drop, with color and tanninin beginning to develop. We have harvest, which occurs between September and October in the Northern Hemisphere, and March and April in the Southern Hemisphere. It is marked when the crop is fully ripened and in balance and the grapes are removed from the vines either by hand or machine. Lastly, we have winter dormancy, which occurs between December and March in the Northern Hemisphere, July through September in the Southern Hemisphere. And as the weather becomes colder, the vines become dormant. The shoots begin to lignify or become woody, the leaves begin to fall, and the vine stores a reserve of carbohydrates in the roots for the next bud burst in the next vintage. This next section is vineyard management, and the first step of vineyard management is our site selection. When establishing a new vineyard, a producer will consider three main factors in their decision making. The first is going to be the environmental conditions: heat, sunlight, water, nutrients, and all of those other environmental factors that go into it that we learned in our previous lesson. When you want to plant a vineyard, a producer considers the temperature of the site. How much sun is it getting? How much rainfall is the area going to receive? And at what point during the year is it going to receive it? Is the soil very fertile? Is it very infertile? Does it have good drainage? Does it have less drainage? All of these considerations will influence what you plant and how you plant it. And we'll get deeper into those factors a little bit later. The next part is going to be the business considerations. How close is the vineyard to utilities like electricity, water, or roads? Is the site accessible? If the site has loose soil, is there going to be sufficient labor that can go ahead and then go up and down these sites? Or do they have built-in roads to be able to get up to the top of a vineyard or to a lower accessible part of the vineyard? Is the labor also going to be seasonal, or is it going to be local? All of these business considerations matter in the site selection. Lastly, we have the grape variety. Now, in the EU, this is subject to regulation. There are only certain grape varieties that can be planted in certain regions. But in the New World, we can kind of plant whatever we want. So it really does matter as to what grape variety is going to be appropriate for that area. And there are grape varieties that are more appropriate for a warmer climate versus a cooler climate with more sun or less sun. After site selection, we will need to consider our planting and replanting. When planting a vineyard, you'll want to clear the land of vegetation, then test your soil. If the soil has any nutritional deficiencies, you can apply fertilizers to correct any deficiencies. Next, you'll bring in your vines. Most producers nowadays buy their young vines from nurseries. This is beneficial because nurseries will test their vines to ensure they are free from diseases and offer more variety of clones to pick from. After planting, you'll want to protect your vines from animals or other hazards, so you may see plastic sleeves or even milk cartons around the vines to help protect them. Once planted, new vines will typically take about 3 years to produce a crop suitable for wine production. This is a main reason why new vineyards or replanting with new vines is such an investment of time and money. You won't see any return of income from your vineyard until your third year. Vines will typically last about 30 to 50 years, and as it ages, the vine will produce lower yields. This is where balance comes in. In the beginning, you might have lighter crop but more growth, and in the middle will be the ideal time for the crop. This would be ideal for wine production. And then towards the end of the life of the vine, you may have more green growth and less fruiting crop. And whether you want to make lower yields from old vines or wait 3 years for new vines to make your own crop, if you replant, is up to the producer and up to the vineyard manager. Vine training means you are permanently shaping the woody parts of the vine. Every year you cut back certain parts of the vine for the next year's crop, but there will always be permanent wood that creates the overall shape of the vine. The way you train a young vine into this shape over time is an important consideration that takes into account the growing environment's effect on grape growing. Now, the two main options are head training and cordon training. With head training, there is very little permanent wood. You have the trunk of your vine and maybe a short little arms that are coming out. With cordon training, you have more permanent wood. Typically, you have your trunk and then horizontal arms called cordons. Usually you will have 2 cordons, but some systems may have 4 or more. The more permanent wood you want to keep on your trained vines, the longer it will take to establish the overall shape. However, the advantage to this is that often you can train these cordons and their shoots in such a way to allow for mechanization, saving you time and labor in the long run. Trellising is the physical structure to help support the vine. In particular, the wires for the green growth to climb up during ripening, whereas training is focusing the permanent wood into the shape the grower desires and achieves this through pruning. Now, some producers choose to not have a trellis to support the vine, with green growth that may grow in all directions but hang downwards. These are typically head trained and spur pruned and are also closer to the ground. They're suitable for dry, hot, sunny regions. In these areas with excess heat, the increased shading aids in protecting the fruit. These wines are not suitable for mechanical harvesting. In trellising, there are 3 main reasons why to trellis. The first is that in arranging your shoots, we can control the amount of sunlight entering the canopy. This is important in areas of low sunlight where we need to maximize the amount of sunlight wherever we can. Remember, we need sunlight to fully ripen. Alternatively, we can also trellis in such a way to provide more shade and would be more important in areas with intense sunlight that could damage our fruit with sunburn. Secondly, it opens up the canopy to improve air circulation. Vines need good circulation to prevent fungal diseases, especially in wet and humid climates. The third reason is the positioning that can ease mechanical harvesting or the mechanical spraying of fungicides. The most well-known trellising is called VSP, or vertical shoot positioning, where we train the shoots straight up and then position them to a V. Vine pruning is the removal of leaves, canes, and permanent wood. It shapes the vine from year to year and is a way to limit the size of the vine. And this can take place in both winter and summer. In winter pruning, as the vine enters dormancy, the wooden parts are removed to establish new buds for both number and location for the crop next year. Spur pruning is cutting down 1-year-old wood down to 1 to 3 buds. In replacement cane pruning, 1-year-old wood that has 8 to 20 buds. The choice is to save one of these canes, bend to the shape for the next year's crop, and prune the rest. And sometimes this is referred to as guillot. Summer pruning is the removal of leaves or green growth to increase or decrease sunlight or airflow to the vine based upon the vine's needs during ripening. Vine density is defined as the number of vines that are planted in an area. Usually you'll see this expressed as the number of vines per hectare, which is a little less than half of 1 acre. The main factors to consider in vine density are soil fertility and water availability. In areas of high soil fertility and or high water availability, we have high vine density. Since there are more nutrients available, we want to encourage competition between the vines, and by planting them closer in rows and spacing. Now in areas of low fertility, we do the opposite. We want to encourage further rows and further spacing between the vines to allow them to explore the soil to gather as many nutrients as they individually can to encourage growth. Yields are the amount of grapes the vineyard produces. This can be measured in tons per hectare, or by volume when the grapes are brought in, such as hectoliters per hectare. It is important to predict the yield in order to budget the amount of resources needed to work the vineyard, but also for the winemaking plan. If yields are too high, green harvesting, or what's known as green drop, is the removal of immature grapes to encourage concentration of flavors and ripening. In many places, such as PDOs, regulations will often limit yields for control of quality and provenance. We've already addressed phylloxera, but there are other vineyard pests that we need to talk about. Nematodes are microscopic worms that attack the roots of the vine. Remember, the roots transport water and nutrients to the vine, so we want to protect them. The best form of management of nematodes is using protective rootstocks or sanitizing the soil. Birds and mammals are also attracted to the fruit as the sugar levels increase, and to deter them, we may use nets or fences. Insects such as the grapevine moth feed on leaves that can lead to disease or hinder photosynthesis. There are many fungal diseases, but we will focus on downy and powdery mildew as well as gray rot. Downy and powdery mildew are a type of fungi that exist in warm, humid conditions that affect the leaves and grapes, which cause the loss of fruit flavors and can make grapes taste moldy and bitter. Gray rot is the same fungus that causes Botrytis cinerea, but it is called gray rot when it is not desired. This is treated with fungicide sprays that include sulfur sprays or copper-based sprays such as the Bordeaux mixture. This can also be managed through opening the canopy for more air circulation, reducing the humidity. Numerous viruses and bacterial infections can occur through cuttings and nematodes. Many times the vines will need to be replanted and the land will need to be sanitized. Sustainable agriculture is the vineyard practice where there is restricted use of man-made chemicals, but not completely restricted. They do encourage natural remedies for pests, such as integrated pest management, where the vineyard will create an ecosystem within the area of the vineyard by encouraging biodiversity. Organic agriculture uses many of the same ideas as sustainable agriculture, but restricts the use of chemicals even further. There are also organic certifiers who give certification to vineyards that meet the standards of the regulating body. Biodynamic agriculture, developed by Rudolf Steiner, is the practice of organic viticulture with the cosmos. The belief is that the movement of the planets, moon, and stars influence the growth of the vines and the grapes. In turn, biodynamic producers will adjust their growing standards to these strict guidelines. Harvest is that time of year when grapes are brought in from the vineyard. This is a call by the winery or the grape grower when ideally the fruit in flavors, sugar, acidity, and tannin for reds are all in balance. On occasion, due to the interruptions of Mother Nature or bottlenecks at a winemaking facility, the fruit may have to come in earlier or later than desired. Timing, budgeting, weather forecasting are all very important to achieve the highest quality standards. We can do this in two ways. There's hand harvesting, which is the harvesting of whole clusters by hand. And this is slower, it's more labor intensive, and can be more costly. And then there's machine harvesting, in which a machine will go over the vine and shakes the vine to release the whole berries off of the clusters. Now this method is very efficient and can reduce the cost for large vineyard areas, especially if they are flatter, but it may not be ideal for certain styles of wines that require whole clusters.